Welcome back to our podcast, Regulation Matters, a Clear Conversation. Once again, I'm your host, Line Dempsey. I'm currently the Chief Compliance Officer with Riccobeni Associates Family Dentistry with locations in North Carolina, South Carolina, and Virginia. I've also been a board member and past president of CLEAR. As many of you are aware, the Council on Licensure Enforcement and Regulation, or CLEAR, is an association of individuals, agencies, and organizations that comprise the international community of professional and occupational regulation. This podcast is a chance for you to hear about important topics in our regulatory community. And in this month's episode, we're going to continue our focus on sharing CLEAR's story with you. We've had a couple previous conversations with board members about their stories of CLEAR connections, learning, and engagement. The board of directors has focused CLEAR's strategic plan on fostering a global inclusive community that promotes regulatory best practice and facilitates information sharing and education excellence. CLEAR encourages involvement from a broad range of perspectives, and members' experiences are enriched by the connections that they make. Joining me today are CLEAR board members Kym Ayscough, Jennifer Garrett, and Michael Carpenter, also known as Mike, to talk about their CLEAR experience. I'm glad to have the opportunity to talk with all of you today.
Thanks, Line. It's great to be with you.
Thanks for having us.
Good to be here, Line.
So I appreciate that. Let's talk about your experience with CLEAR's global community. I guess, what is your story of first getting involved with CLEAR and then ultimately leading to committee and board service? I'd like to start with Jen on this and then follow that with Mike and then finish with Kym.
I'm happy to go first, Line. I have been working at our agency for about 6 years. So I started this summer before the pandemic. So my first engagements with CLEAR were virtual. I then went to the annual educational conference in Louisville, and I enjoyed the sessions. I, made small talk with people in the hallways, but I wouldn't say anything really clicked for me until the following year when I went to the conference in Salt Lake City. And I decided to do some of the social events because I figured, why not? I'm here. I was at the conference with a couple of other people from work, but they brought their spouses and they had other things to do. So I signed up for curling. And that's interestingly where I met Michael. And I had a lot of fun, but more than that, I was able to really better develop relationships with some of the other people there. And then Michael and I stayed in touch, and it really started to feel more like a community than just an organization that put on conferences. So I was really glad I stepped out of my comfort zone because I don't think I had ever done a social event at a conference before in my entire life. So it was a pivotal moment for me, and it really did change the level of engagement for me in CLEAR. And I've just been so grateful for the relationships that I've made and the opportunities that have come after that.
Now, quick question. Were you on Paul's team or my team in that one?
I was on Michael's team. I don't think you or Paul were on my team.
Okay, because I just do remember that our team won, so I didn't know if you were part of the winning group or not. So
I think we won, didn't we, Michael?
I think we might have, but yeah, I wouldn't want to crow about it. But yes, it was a glorious victory.
Awesome. How about your journey, Michael?
So I'm not sure this is the right way to start, but I first came across CLEAR by chance. I was in Boston for a dental regulation conference in 2015, and myself and some colleagues came across this thing called the CLEAR Annual Education Conference that ran alongside the dental conference. So we thought it looked very interesting and we should stay and give it a whirl. And it was fantastic. We met all these fabulous people, heard all these really interesting presentations, and found ourselves for the first time probably at an event where people spoke the same language as us. And when you told people you work for a regulator, they just didn't stare blankly at you. So I had this fantastic experience in terms of the conference itself, and like Jen was saying, the people I met. So I decided I wanted to come back the next year, and I submitted a paper for the conference. It was accepted, and I did the same the next year. and the next year. So started becoming a little bit of a Clear regular, and really got a lot out of going to the events in person, hearing other presentations, and just meeting people through the conference itself or the social events. And probably after about 3 years, thought about how do I get more involved? How could I contribute more? And so put my hand up and volunteered for a couple of the Clear committees, which is something that anyone can do. And that was great to get a little bit more involved in stuff behind the scenes, thinking about how we could sort of shape what Clear does to support its members, and getting more opportunity to hear from other members about what they were dealing with in their jurisdictions. So did that for a couple of years, and then quietly got tapped on the shoulder to ask if I'd be interested in being deputy chair of a couple of committees, and was very happy to do that, and got involved a little bit more. And through that, got to know a few of the then Clear board members, who then suggested that maybe putting my hand up to serve on the board might be something I'd be interested in. So did that, and that's how I found myself here today after, I think, nearly 5 years serving on the board.
Excellent. Thank you. And Kym?
Thanks, Line. So I think I would describe myself as the elder statesperson in this group. So my first Clear event was in 2009 at I think the first Clear International Congress in Dublin, Ireland. So at that time, Australia was just in the process of moving from state-based profession-specific regulation of health practitioners to what would become a single national regulatory scheme that was going to start in July of 2010. So at that time of kind of change and quite probably, I would say, turmoil in the world of health practitioner regulation, a colleague pointed out to me this conference that was happening in Dublin, which looked like an opportunity to kind of lift your head out of the turmoil and think about regulation and what it is and what you could learn from other people. So it was a fantastic first experience. I have to say that, traveling from the other side of the world solo, it was a very welcoming environment. There were invitations to join those who already knew each other for dinner and those kinds of things immediately, which was just such a great experience for the first encounter with the organisation. And I think from the very beginning, what struck me about Clear was the opportunity to talk about regulation well beyond your own experience. So there are a lot of health regulators in the world, and they have various forums in which they come together. Clear is the place where you speak to people who regulate funeral homes and cosmeticians and real estate and accountants. And I think that's really, for me, that's helped me to start to think more about myself as a regulatory or regulation professional, because you're not just looking down the lens of your own experience. And then very much like Mike, kind of, one great experience means you start to sign up for further events, and then you sign up for committees and find yourself standing for election to the board. And in my case, being a president of the board for a period. And I guess I'm so committed to it that I actually stood for election again after my term as president, and I'm about to finish my final year on the board of directors.
Well, we thank you for all the many years of service that you've given this organization. I think you brought up a couple of really interesting points. And I think, looking at this from a kind of a global or large scale regulatory group. So not just one specific, industry or license, but this larger group that we're kind of all getting together and sharing knowledge about how we do certain things a certain way, and that expertise that we have. With the ultimate goal, I guess, of kind of promoting this regulatory best practice, right? And so, I guess how, and I'll start with you, Kym, because you've got the longest tenure of the three here today. But like, how has this involvement in Clear made you a better regulator?
Well, I think, Line, my experience would say now, after many, many years, that the challenges in the world of regulation are very similar regardless of the sector that you are working in. And if you can approach the issues from that perspective and not just thinking about the specific profession or sector, then you can absorb information from others and look at the way that they're doing things and sort of modify. So it's not quite that sort of nothing new under the sun, because there are things changing in the world of regulation all the time. But it just gives you that opportunity to listen and learn from others. So, I mean, I remember clearly one of the early events that I took part in, or one of the learnings, was the executive leadership program that CLEAR offers. And just really timely, I think a lot of the focus in the program at that time was about managing the environment. So it was about the fact that regulators need to engage with their community and with their authorising environment, the governments that authorise you to do what you do. And that's been a kind of an enduring growth in the world of regulation, I think.
Awesome. Mike, how about you?
Yeah, look, Kym summed that up very nicely, and definitely one of the things that CLEAR's really helped me develop is that perspective that Kym talked about. Recognizing that we all work in a particular field, and through CLEAR you meet people in all weird and wonderful fields. I met someone at a conference once who regulated florists, and despite working with very different professions and in very different parts of the world, it's helped me see that we have far more in common than we do that's different, and that we share many, many common challenges. So that perspective's been really helpful. And sort of added to that, and I touched on it a little bit in answer to our last question, is the network you develop through CLEAR as well. We've already said, we meet so many interesting, wonderful people working in similar and different fields from all parts of the world, and that's been invaluable to have that network to reach out to test ideas, to share practices, and I think particularly during the early 20s, when we're in the grip of COVID and we had to meet virtually, that network was probably doubly valuable. I couldn't see colleagues from my office who lived a few kilometers down the road, and to be able to reach out to colleagues on the other side of the world was both extremely helpful professionally, but also personally as well. So I wouldn't underplay the value of the network in helping making me a better regulator as well. And probably the last thing as well, when we have the opportunity to come together for face-to-face events, is just how valuable that is as well, to have that time to, Kym, I think you described it as the turmoil of the day-to-day, and actually think about what we do and why we do it, and have those conversations with like-minded colleagues. So I think all of those have just been really helpful to me professionally.
Awesome. Thank you, Mike. Jen?
Well, I'm going to echo a lot of what Kym and Michael said, so it may not sound all that original, but the network of colleagues is tremendously valuable. I talk to people all day long, every day, all kinds of stakeholders. And in Wisconsin, our agency is the primary and largest occupational regulator in the state. There are a couple of other agencies that have some smaller groups of occupations, but we're really it. And so I don't have a lot of peers to turn to within my government administration. And most of the people who are interested in our work have a vested interest in our work. And so they're not impartial. And sometimes I need to talk to somebody who doesn't care about my outcome and can just give me advice about the policy or the issue. And I have those people because of CLEAR. And it's so helpful, because when you work within a system, especially, our regulation in Wisconsin is government. We're not a separate kind of legislative authority or related organization. We are the government, and government can get entrenched, and like any large institution, and the way you do things is the way you think they have to be done. And it's really hard sometimes to see opportunity to do things differently, or how you may have shifted away from what you're supposed to be doing or what the requirements are, and into how you're doing it, and you get stuck in the how and lose sight of the what and the why. And so having this network of people to go to think, am I crazy? Is there another way to look at this? Have you ever encountered this? Is incredible. And I've done that with Kym. We've been trying to deal with the proliferation of some new healthcare facilities that don't fit into our typical healthcare facility regulation in the state. And they've already addressed this, maybe not solved it all, but Kym is much farther along than we are. And it was fascinating to learn, but also not surprising, I guess, that they're facing similar challenges. And although they have different laws and different regulations, there's still kind of the core issues that underline the problem and the solution in both places. So I talk to people in Australia, I talk to people in Ireland, I talk to people in other states to get insights into my work, and they all provide incredible and invaluable insights.
That's fantastic. Well, Mike, let me ask you this. I know you've obviously been, involved in CLEAR for quite some time. Are there maybe some specific examples of things that you've learned either through CLEAR programs or their offerings that you've actually been able to take and apply to your own regulatory work?
And this goes back to the in-person events as well, where you get so much knowledge from both the conference sessions you attend, but also the conversations you have with people. And last year we were starting a piece of work looking at international health practitioners coming to Australia, and anyone who works in regulation at the moment will know that international mobility is a big thing. And we were tasked with looking at how do you streamline that pathway into registration to meet workforce needs without compromising public safety. And so one of the first pieces of work we wanted to do in that project team was a bit of an international scan, looking at what's good practice look like elsewhere, what can we learn from others so we don't repeat the same mistakes. And so what we were able to do was reach out very quickly through the network of contacts I'd had with CLEAR and people I'd heard speak at conferences to actually just ask the question, what do you do? What are you experiencing? What do you find works for you? What have been the pitfalls? And that actually enabled the team to gather a lot of information very quickly through those contacts to really sort of give them a good baseline of information and kickstart their project very quickly. So I guess a small example of what I've been able to take from CLEAR, both in terms of what I've heard and learned and people I've met to really feed into and inform an important piece of work that we're dealing with at the moment.
Thanks, Mike. Jen, I remember meeting you in Louisville. So you've had opportunity to go to some of these programs now. Are there things other than these connections that you've made that you've been able to use?
Yes, definitely. As I mentioned earlier, before I joined our agency, I worked at well, maybe I didn't mention this. I worked at the UW-Madison School of Nursing. And so while I was there, I was aware that there was a nursing workforce survey that was attached to the nursing renewal. And then faculty from the School of Nursing did the analysis of the data. And it was the only required survey in the state. It was the only profession that had a survey. And so when I went to the administration, we immediately began talking, and I began talking with our leadership that we really should look at expanding these surveys to other professions, because the kinds of insights that you get are invaluable. They teach you, or they show you where your gaps in care are going to be in 5 years and in 10 years, and where your gaps in the educational pipeline are going to be in 5 and 10 years, and where they are now. And so we immediately started talking about that. Soon after, some stakeholders came to us with interest in doing surveys for our physicians and our dentists. And so we worked with them and another state department to independently develop surveys. And then 2 years later, we revised those. But at Clear, I learned about the cross-profession minimum data set, which is a standard set of questions and a survey tool that you can implement across professions. So you're getting similar information, so you can compare dentists to physicians, not just dentists to dentists over years. And it was really the answer we needed because we didn't have resources to independently develop surveys for all of our professions. And we have just too many within our agency. And also the process of working with multiple stakeholders to develop a survey instrument was very time consuming and challenging. And it also didn't feel scientific enough. And if we really want to rely on the data and have it be useful for policymakers and higher education, it needed that next level of rigor. And discovering something that already existed that was developed in that manner that we could just kind of plug and play. I mean, it's not quite that simple, but it's close to that simple. It was kind of watershed for us, and I hadn't heard about that until I had been to Clear, and that's been one of our primary policy initiatives at our agency since I've been there, and that I think that's huge, and I think the opportunity we have to make a difference for our state is incredible, and I wouldn't have encountered it as early as I did if I hadn't been attending Clear events.
Right on. That's fantastic. And Kym.
Thanks, Line. Yeah, I think I always reflect on the committee meeting structures at Clear. And one of the most valuable parts of each of those committee meetings for me is the environmental scan, where every person in the room has the opportunity to talk about what is on their mind, what's affecting their regulatory agency, what's happening in their jurisdiction. And I think over time, what I've come to learn is that coming soon to a place near you is probably what you would say if you are not already experiencing a particular challenge or a particular area of focus, then you soon will be. And so it's not a specific learning, it is just that general learning that being in that environment, having people talk about what is happening for them. And it might be slightly controversial at the moment given the kind of, geopolitical environment, but I think there's been this continuing conversation across regulators about fairness in regulation, making sure that we are addressing, so what regulators often will just trip out the line that says our role is public protection. And there's this assumption that the public is some kind of homogenous group, all having the same needs and with the same expectations. And I think at Clear over many years, there have been these discussions from different jurisdictions about how they have come to understand that the public is probably publics, plural, and their expectations of us and what they need from us as regulators are not identical. And so I think that's been a really fascinating conversation. And also fascinating, like beyond the world of regulation, as a human, I've learned so much about different communities and the way that they operate around the world, and how these things come to attention and how they are addressed.
Well, you guys all brought up some great points and things that we can use. I think, the environmental scan is one of those things that I've also really kind of just latched onto. But like when I first came to Clear, it was, I was an investigator. I was doing NCIT programs. I was doing investigator roundtable, and it was investigator focused for me, my experience, my journey, if you would. But just doing those roundtables where you got this again large scale perspective from different regulatory agencies, of again, sort of like you say, almost like a prophecy. If you've not had this problem yet, you're gonna have this problem. And so having that, this kind of global experience, bringing all these different minds together, that really just, I mean, again, it's one of those things they did with one of the committees a few years back, where they took several different committees and combined them into one, which brought different people from different walks of life, which just really enriched that experience. I think, Bo, this one of the things that Clear's strategic plan is focused on is learning or leading, I guess I should say better, the global practice. So what characteristics or elements do you think of when you think about regulatory best practice? And I'm going to go with you, Kym, because I liked your comment about the protecting the public. That seems to be always the general thing that we say, but like taking it a step further, best practice.
So I think this is something that evolves over time as well, isn't it? And I possibly would not have said this a few years ago, but I would say now that regulatory best practice actually requires agility, because the world is changing so rapidly. The way I work in healthcare regulation, so the way healthcare is delivered is changing almost week to week, it seems. Beyond that, the delivery of services generally, which is where most of our professionals are working, is changing rapidly. And the expectations that our community or communities have of us are also changing. So I think it is that regulation, best practice regulation, is not set and forget. It's not about having a standard set of rules and applying them in the same way every day, week in, week out. It's really about having your gaze focused up and outward to what is happening in the world around you, and thinking about how do you really understand all of the regulatory tools that are available to you, regardless of what your authorising legislation or environment is. How do you understand all of those tools and decide which ones do I deploy for this particular challenge? So yeah, I would say one of the features at least of best practice regulation in 2025 is that agility and observation, I guess.
Brilliant, like it. Mike, what about you? What kind of characteristics elements do you think are kind of emerging here?
Yeah, look, completely agree with what Kym said there around the ability to be agile, and that's a challenge for all of us. I think on top of that, we've obviously seen in recent years as well the emergence of the notion of kindness in what we do as an element of good practice, and regulation not simply being about keeping out or punishing the bad actors, but actually doing what we do in a way that looks after everybody in the system. Both those who've been victims of poor practice, or the practitioners who've had complaints made against them. And I think certainly I've seen through CLEAR a lot of regulators sort of recognise that that's actually an important component of what we do. So it's not just what we do, but how we do it. And even in my time with CLEAR, that's been a real shift I've noticed, that people are having that conversation. And I think as well, certainly, I'm seeing increasing scrutiny on, I guess, how we use our funds, whether it's government funding or funding from the professionals that we regulate, and being held accountable and demonstrating that we're making good use of those funds. And I think, I'm certainly seeing where I work just a much, much stronger focus on having to demonstrate that, having to demonstrate that we're being efficient, effective, focusing on the right thing, and doing that in quite a transparent way and a fair way. So I think sort of being open to that scrutiny and embracing it, and not seeing it as a challenge or a burden, but an opportunity to demonstrate the good we're doing.
Fantastic. And Jen?
Well, I want to go back to something Kym said about how we kind of trot out the trope, we're protecting the public. And I do think about that our job is to protect the public or prevent or minimize the opportunity for harm. But I also think it's our responsibility is also to minimize the opportunity for friction. So we could, think about the bubble kit. You could wrap everything in bubble wrap to prevent any bad thing from happening. But then that prevents the good things from happening, and the professional services and the care that needs to be delivered. So we have to find the right balance. And I always tell people that government works best when you don't notice it, when you're getting what you need and it's not getting in your way. And I think about, like, everybody's seen the duck that's gliding on the water, but then its feet are paddling furiously. And I feel like that's what regulation is, that we work furiously so that things can glide smoothly. And I guess so. I guess that's not a best practice, but that's kind of what I'm always working toward. That we're making sure that we are protecting the public, that we're reducing opportunity for harm, that we're aware of the challenges, um, that we're aware of the things that could cause harm, but we're also not holding back innovations in healthcare, innovations in other professions that can do great things for customers, for the public, for our communities. And so, yeah, I try to be that duck, or make our agency that duck that just seems to glide along. I'm the feet paddling below to make sure it all works and no one notices the effort. And I think that what I've learned from Clear is that we're all doing that. We're all working really hard. We're doing a lot that people don't notice because people don't think about regulation. I mean, kind of back to what Michael said, having people who speak your language. We get really nerdy about this stuff and get really lost in the minutia, so that the people we license and the public don't have to think and don't have to work so hard. We try to make it easy for them.
That's great. Well, Mike, you mentioned something earlier, a very glass half full kind of thing, which was, instead of them being challenges, they're opportunities. So I'll give you the option to go either way on this. So, what are the greatest challenges and or opportunities that you see regulators kind of facing in order to achieve this regulatory excellence that we're shooting for?
Kim sort of touched on a couple of those already, and I think not just being able to adapt, but the necessity to be able to adapt is going to be absolutely vital for us as regulators going forward. We're seeing, I guess, AI as an example in terms of just how that's disrupted and changed the professions we regulate. And there's a challenge for us as regulators. How do we build a regulatory model that adapts quickly to recognize the way that practitioners the way the practitioners' practice is changing. So I think that's a real challenge, to be agile enough to build systems that are agile enough to be able to follow that. I think Kym also touched on the geopolitical environment at the moment, and Australia is very interesting that we have a general election every 3 years, and so you can imagine a changing government, possibly each time. With very different priorities, that I think that creates challenges for us. We're seeing without wishing to get into politics, politics is becoming more and more polarized and more and more extreme. And as regulators, we're a little bit caught in the middle. And governments of one persuasion will have a particular view about regulation needing to be stronger, and those of another persuasion that it needs to be diluted. And it goes to adaptability, I guess, as well. How do we build a model that can operate against those extremes? And probably for me, a bit of a pet issue is, we're here because we believe what we do is important. But how do we attract good people to come and work with us? What we do is only as good as the people who do it. And nobody grows up saying, I want to, when I grow older, I want a career in regulation. We probably all stumble into regulation one way or another. And I think there's a real challenge for us to pitch it as an attractive career option. How do we get the good people who can really help turn ideas into reality and make us as good as we can be as regulators? And I think that's an interesting challenge that we probably don't engage with at the moment. When we recruit, we mop up good people, but I'm always interested in what it is attracts people to want to come and work in regulation, and how can we do that better and sell ourselves better?
That's great. I like that. And Kym, how about you? Mike mentioned you a couple times on some of your things in adaptability, but so let's go to you now.
Thanks, Line. And I guess in some ways I'm building on Mike's last comment about the kind of people that you need to have working in your agency if you're going to be delivering excellent regulation. And I'm going to link that to, I think, kind of started during the pandemic, and it seems to have continued post-pandemic, which is the erosion of trust in institutions, and that includes the erosion of trust in regulators. And I think it's been a perpetual challenge in the many years now that I've been involved in regulation. Engendering trust in the community is such an important goal for regulators, and has become more difficult when we are kind of lumped in with other institutions in this kind of erosion of trust. So I think I was just trying to find the reference. It's quite dated now, actually, from sort of 2017, 2018, but Honora O'Neill talks about the distinction between trust and trustworthiness. And I think Jen made a great point about the kind of, the ducks on the pond analogy. Somebody else just in recent days was talking about when you buy milk from the supermarket, you don't explore all of the ways that the milk is, that you can satisfy yourself that the milk is safe. You just trust that it is, because somebody, food safety agencies and others, are doing what they need to do, so that you can do that without thinking. And I think, as I said, for me, this is part of understanding who are the communities that we are regulating for, understanding what they think we are doing, and engendering that trust or trustworthiness by being open and being transparent, and giving people that opportunity to get on with their lives because they understand that we are doing things that we should be doing. And also the other one for me, I think, which is the perpetual challenge for regulators, is making sure that people can find us when they need to. So in that responsive part of regulation, I think we could run all kinds of education campaigns about what we do and how you make a complaint to us, for example, and what happens when you do. But actually, 99% of the community don't need to know that until they need to know. And so it's finding those ways of letting people know about our existence, so it's there if they need it.
Yeah, that's great. And so often we, I mean, I'm a recovering regulator, as I call myself, but like as regulators, we tend to get a bit of a bad rap, because usually the protection side of the public that we end up seeing is the one where we're taking licenses, we're doing something to discipline somebody or whatever. It's not about all the positive things, like the thousands and thousands upon millions of times when we've done the right thing and you just don't know. It's the feet paddling under the water that Jen so eloquently brought about. How about you, Jen?
I think for us, the biggest challenge is always resources, and resources are always a challenge because of the political nature of our work. And so we're always having to prove our worth and prove that we're worthy to spend the money that we bring in for licensing fees. We can't just bring it in and spend it. We bring it in, and then someone else has to tell us we're allowed to spend it. And so we're constantly making our case. And right now, we have a lot of critics who don't value regulation in the same way that our agency leadership does. And so not only do we have to do our work, but we constantly have to defend our work. But that's also an opportunity, because it forces us to stay on our toes and to be transparent and very forthcoming about how things are working. And if they're not, to be open about the fact that they're not, and open to criticism and willing to dig in and fix things. And it can be humbling at times, and I wouldn't say I enjoy that constant dynamic, but it really does force us to be good at what we do. It would be easy to slide into complacency without that, to just say, well, this is how we do things. We're the government. This is how it works. But because we have that expectation that we do things well and we answer for it, I think we'd probably do things well anyway. But I know we're doing things well because we have to produce the data, we have to answer the questions, and the answers we're getting are good. So while it's a challenge, it also keeps us on our toes. And I feel good knowing that we're doing good things for the people of Wisconsin, and we have the evidence to prove it.
That's awesome. Well, I tell you, one of the things that I've loved about doing, especially this series, is hearing these stories of these journeys that we've all been on. Right, I've been fortunate to be, at the start of several of these, and I imagine that we've got some listeners tonight, or today, that their path, their journey is just starting. And I think my big question now, I guess the last question that I'll ask y'all, and we'll start with you, Jen, but is, how are we positioning the organization, Clear, to kind of drive this educational excellence and at the same time contribute to the success of regulatory leaders through all stages of their career path, not just the ones that are starting right now, but the ones that maybe that are getting into the twilight side of things. But we'll start with you, Jen.
I think Clear does a good job of offering a range. So there's the NCIT, the investigator training, but there's also the executive leadership programming. There's the committees that kind of run the gamut of topics, that from operational things to policy things to leadership things. And I think that it's hard to do a little bit of everything and do it all well. But I think Clear has done a good job of that. I think for the people who are more experienced, the opportunity to dig into some of the meatier things and the policy things, and those are the things that you discover transcend geography and profession. It wasn't a Clear event, but I was somewhere else, and someone was mentioning that the biggest challenge for their profession was boundary issues. And so I came back and I was talking to our attorneys, and it turns out that that's one of the biggest issues in all of our professions. And as I dug into it more, the two of the things that I think concern me for all of our professions are, boundary issues, and kind of the personal side creeping into the professional side, but then burnout. And that seems to be pervasive across all kinds of professions. And I love that Clear has a place for that kind of learning and that kind of conversation too, not just how to investigate and how to run a board meeting, but also the thornier things that are a little more nebulous and challenging, and we can dig into those too.
Awesome. Thank you. Mike.
Yeah, there are probably two things I'd highlight. Just to build on what Jen was saying, one of the things that Clear has started to support in the last couple of years is a mentoring program. So, to go back to my last point, nobody sets out in life wanting to be a regulator. We all find ourselves there through sort of different routes. And so a career in regulation looks very different from if you've trained in a profession where maybe you study for your qualification, you go through some sort of graduate training program, you've got lots of support mechanisms around you, you've probably got a professional association that helps with that. So I think that's been a really important development from Clear to put something in place for either people new to regulation or early career regulators, to give them that support, to give them a platform to have a conversation with people who've been there and been on that journey. And I got involved in that last year, and I got as much out of it as I hope my mentee did. She was someone who'd come from a profession, was now working in regulation in that profession, and didn't know what she didn't know. She'd just been dropped into this role and was expected to know everything. So I think that's absolutely something Clear's done that I think is fantastic, and certainly hope we continue to do, because we've got a bit of a duty, I think, to help support the next generation of regulators who are going to deal with some of the challenges we touched on in the last question. And probably the other thing I want to highlight that Clear is doing at the moment, which I think and I hope will be very interesting, is really taking a better look at what does our membership look like. So under the auspices of our DEI committee, we're starting to gather information on our members and also the attendees at our events, just to get a sense of how much of the regulatory community we're reaching. What does our membership look like? Where are we doing really well in terms of attracting people to Clear and engaging with us, and where can we do better? So I think that will really help CLEAR be a better support to regulators, and hopefully help us recognise where we're not doing as well as we could. So I'm really interested to see where we land on that and what it tells us. If we do that well, it sort of becomes a bit self-fulfilling. The more people we attract to CLEAR, the more diverse membership base we have, then the richer and stronger CLEAR becomes. So I'm really supportive of that and really interested to see what we can learn from that.
No, that's excellent. Thank you. And finishing up with Kym.
Thanks, Line. So I think, again, I'm going to build on particularly some things that Mike was talking about and things we've just spoken about across the whole of this discussion. So I think in addition to wanting to understand more about who our members are today, I think CLEAR is increasingly purposeful about identifying where we don't have voices. So which parts of the world have we not yet engaged in our global conversation about regulation? Which professions have we not yet engaged in our conversation about regulation? And so I think it's fantastic that we just, I think over my time at CLEAR, we've become more and more purposeful about testing those notions, wanting to involve people in these discussions who might not ordinarily sign up for that kind of conversation. So places where regulation is an emerging concept. I mean, many of the members of CLEAR are in places where regulation is quite a mature concept. But there are parts of the world where the concept of professional regulation is just starting to emerge. And I think we can learn from each other as we do that. So I think that really purposeful looking at where do we not have a voice into our discussions. And connected to that, the other thing I am very excited about in the CLEAR strategic plan and strategic direction is really understanding the experiences people have when they come to CLEAR. So I think it's been really fascinating that we've all spoken today about how we felt very welcome and we've made great relationships and established fantastic networks that support our professional development and also make it a personal pleasure to participate in CLEAR events. And I think what we've recognised is we don't want that to be accidental. So again, don't really want to leave anyone behind. So if you are, as I was in 2009, travelling to the other side of the world on your own for a CLEAR event, how do we make sure that we really foster the creation of those relationships which both keep you involved in CLEAR, but really enrich your life? Because of the connections that you've made.
Yeah, that's definitely excellent. And I think I wanted to just kind of point out one of the things that Mike brought up too. I love the mentor program. Even if you're not doing one through CLEAR, be a mentor or be a mentee, depending on where you are in that stage of life and your career. I think it's a great opportunity. And then, we often have the opportunity for first-time attendees that come to CLEAR for a special program at the very beginning. And usually a lot of the, for lack of a better term, seasoned CLEAR members that have been involved either in committees or serving on the board are out there to kind of engage with these folks and kind of introduce them to the family, if you would, because I know how it's been. I've been there before when I was the first-time attendee and didn't know anybody. I was the only one from my organization that came. And although, as you guys all know, I'm a bit of an extrovert, so I usually don't have problems making friends, but there are certainly folks that are maybe not as extroverted as me or just kind of want to stay in their own place and having an opportunity at least to see that there's other people that are in the same boat as you are is one of those things that is just a fantastic thing. So I think it's been a really great conversation today. There's been some really great reflections from the regulatory colleagues from around the globe, literally today. So I want to thank all of you, Kym, Jen, and Mike, for kind of sharing your story of what brought you to CLEAR and why you're still here. So thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Line.
Thanks, Line. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you, Line. It's been a pleasure.
It's always a great time talking with you guys. And for CLEAR members that are interested in becoming more engaged with CLEAR, the call for board nominations is open now. Nominations must be received by Friday, June 20th. CLEAR members can go to the CLEAR website under the About tab and click on Clear Leadership Nomination Info to find information about available seats and read about board member requirements and duties. And you can always reach out to staff or any of our current or past board members for more information. We welcome your involvement. Another way to engage with CLEAR colleagues is through the CLEAR Regulatory Network, where members can post questions and discussions. We invite CLEAR members to share your own CLEAR story with us on our CLEAR Regulatory Network. This podcast will be posted there with an invitation for members to post your comments and make further CLEAR connections. And if you haven't already joined the CLEAR Regulatory Network, we invite and encourage you to join and take part in the online discussions. They're very fulfilling. I also want to thank our listeners for tuning in to this episode. We'll be back with another episode of Regulation Matters, a CLEAR conversation, very soon. And if you're new to the CLEAR podcast, please subscribe to us. You can find us on Podbean or any of your favorite podcast services. If you've enjoyed this podcast episode, please leave a rating or comment in the app. Those reviews help us to improve our ranking and make it easier for new listeners to find us. Feel free also to visit our website at www.clearhq.org for additional resources, as well as a calendar of upcoming programs and events. And finally, I'd like to thank our CLEAR staff, specifically Stephanie Thompson. She is our content coordinator and editor for this program. And once again, I'm Line Dempsey, and I hope to be speaking to you again very soon.